If I fear rockets and I believe the air defense command, when the siren goes off, I will go to the shelter because there's a consequence I have associated with that thing. So to fear God is to say there's a consequence at the judgment, and his decision on whether this is good or evil is more important than what other people think of my accumulation in this life, all of which will be forgotten shortly after I'm gone.
Hello and welcome to Biblical Money. I'm your host, Rabbi Rami Goldberg, and sitting with me today is Mr. Tim Dunn, who had built up an oil business in Texas. I believe there was an exit a couple of years back at this point, and has been involved in politics, involved in religion as a preacher in his church. I've seen some of the sermons, so thank you very much for joining us today.
Glad to be here, Rami.
So, Tim, a lot of what we focus on is talking about business and the Bible. And I know that you have tried to run your business as ethically and as morally and as consistently with biblical principles as possible. So let's really jump into kind of, some of the principles that you really look to lead your business and where you kind of see those coming from before you make various business decisions.
Well, I would say maybe the first thing would be the reason to be in business. So it's pretty common to be in business to gain more. The goal of business is to gain more. And, since we're talking about biblical money, we can say that we can use Ecclesiastes 5:10, which basically says somebody that chases money will never be happy with how much they have. So, if you chase more, then your business owns you, or your money owns you. And so I think if you do that, if you fall into that trap, which I'd say is our natural bent actually as humans, if you fall into that trap, you're going to get sucked into fear of loss. Fear of loss is going to cause you to, have stress. Stress is going to cause you to cut corners. I mean, that's just kind of a swirl down the drain that happens. So I think the first thing is just okay, I want to be in business because I want to be a great steward of my gifts. And if you think of it as stewardship, then in a sense you have nothing to lose. If you're a great steward, then what happens. And sometimes markets change and there's nothing you can do about it. And there's, what you thought was going to be valuable isn't anymore. And of course that's always disappointing, but it was never yours to begin with. So I think that's the first thing. It's what is your purpose? And if you think of it as steward, I'm a steward, everything's owned by God, I'm a steward, then you really set yourself up to focus on how you do what you do more than what you accumulate or what the results are. So that'd be my first thing.
I mean, was this something that you developed over time, or when you started out in business, you didn't start off owning a business, you started off working for somebody? Or
That's right. I didn't have my own business until my early 40s. And I would say that's definitely something that I learned over time. There's a passage in the New Testament where Jesus is interacting. It's Jew to Jew, but it's a guy comes up to Jesus and says, "Hey, what?" The phrase they use, eternal life, which as I understand it, and looking in that context, means the most possible fulfillment of life. Aionios zoe. So the guy asked, Rabbi, how can I have the most fulfillment possible? And Jesus says, well, obey the commands. And the guy says, well, I've done that since my youth. And the Mark version of it said, and Jesus looked at him and loved him. So what I take from that is man, I really like this guy. He's really close. he's right on the edge. And so he says, well, you have one thing lacking. Get rid of all that stuff and give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And the guy's like, that's just too much. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and says, rich people just have a really hard time inheriting the kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, because they've got their hand, and this is me adding now, their hands are full. And if your hands are full of earthly stuff, you don't have them open for spiritual stuff, for heavenly stuff. And so Peter says, well, then who can be saved? And he said, well, with God, anything's possible. So I took that parable and thought about it and thought, I know that doesn't mean everybody should sell everything they have or give everything away, because then it would be a perpetual game of hot potato. I'll give it to you, and then you give it to the next person, and then you just, you're in this constant state of giving, or nobody would have anything. So that's not what it's talking about. But what it is talking about is what are you clutching onto that's keeping your hands from being open? And so I practice this thing of kind of deeding everything over that I have. I've got title to stuff, but I just have this constant view. I developed this over the last 40 years or so, or 30 years. I've got this constant view that everything I possess is passing through my hands on the way somewhere else. I'm going to leave it behind when I die. I'm going to lose it to somebody else. I'm going to sell it. Something. Nothing's permanent in this life. And I take that as a literal way to practice that principle. And it's actually, I took it mainly from Jesus, but you can get it also from Solomon. Let's see, Ecclesiastes. How come I don't have there it is. Ecclesiastes 12:13. So after you get through this whole Ecclesiastes, you have like the middle of Ecclesiastes, you've got this Ecclesiastes 5:10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. And that word vanity is a translation of the Hebrew word hebel. I don't know how you pronounce it properly.
Yes, hevel, with a V,
Hevel,
H-E-V-E-L. Yeah, hevel.
Yes, hevel, which means a wisp of vapor. James in the New Testament says your life is but a wisp of vapor. That's actually paraphrases a verse from Ecclesiastes, because hevel is translated vanity or futility everywhere in Ecclesiastes except one time when it's translated of brevity for life, because it's this wisp of vapor. And so the image of Ecclesiastes is trying to do life from reason and experience, trying to do life from the tree of knowledge of good and evil of my own way is like trying to grab vapor. It's just something you're never going to be able to do. So then Ecclesiastes ends with these two verses. The conclusion when all has been heard is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether good or evil. So there you have like the real goal of life is to be a good steward, a good enough steward where God says you did a good job. That's the real goal of life. And to fear God, this word, the Greek in the Septuagint, that word is translated phobos or phobos. Phobia, we get our English word from. And you fear something when you adjust your actions based on perceived consequences from that thing. Like if I fear the police, I will adjust my behavior because I don't want to get a speeding
You'll
ticket.
slow down, right? Exactly.
Yeah, or if I fear rockets, and I believe the Air Defense Command, when the siren goes off, I will go to the shelter, right? Because there's a consequence I have associated with that thing. So to fear God is to say there's a consequence at the judgment, and his decision on whether this is good or evil is more important than what other people think of my accumulation in this life, all of which will be forgotten shortly after I'm gone. So that's the basic mentality that I have developed, and that I continually try to practice, because you're constantly tempted to retake possession. And I can tell that when I start getting a little sense of angst, I've taken possession again. I've got to go back through deeding it over. This is not mine, it's yours. I want to be a good manager of this, but it's not mine. And there's a lot of freedom in that, but there's also a lot of responsibility.
Right. It's that line, because we're not a bunch of socialists that everything belongs to everybody. It was put in my possession, but then to do something good with it. So I'm curious if you have like a practice when you say deeding it over. Is that just like in your head, or do you actually like sit in your journal and say like, no, this money is not mine, and like as a practice? I've
gotten to where I can do it in my head, but I recommend to people, if they're struggling, to write out a deed and lift it up. But I do it mentally. But I went through a time. I'll tell you, one of the times when I really learned this, I went through a time we had a significant exit years and years ago. It was the first really significant event that had happened. First time it went beyond what I had ever expected. And so I set aside a part and said, I'm going to give this away. And I started doing these various activities to give this away that were getting thwarted right and left. And finally, I felt God spoke to me and said, why do you keep trying to get rid of this stewardship and give it to somebody else? I gave this to you to be a good steward. I want you to take responsibility for this. And I was like, that's really right. Why do I think that passing stewardship from me to a professional, a person whose profession is saying no to grant requests is a positive event? And what was I thinking? I've been inculcated that shifting something from a for-profit account to a non-profit account is charity. And that's just a tax maneuver. It's my responsibility to place this money in a way that does good. And so that was a pretty big shift for me.
There's a story where a guy comes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, I was just blessed with all this money. Where should it go? He said, I don't know. God gave it to you. He clearly wants you to take care of it. So the same type of thing. It's so interesting that some people they set up a family foundation and they hire a person. But you're saying you sit on every grant application, and it's really something that you look at to ensure that you're being the steward within.
Well, I look at it just as another investment portfolio. We are good at certain things. Our family is really good at certain things. We're not so good at other things. We are, the nature of the oil business is pretty high risk. It's it's a very high leverage business in terms of leveraging knowledge, especially like as things are happening quickly, you have to take that knowledge and put it to action, fast, because it's highly competitive, and so it requires a lot of the same kind of skills that would make you a good card player. You got to kind of keep your nerve when and not get carried away. It's requires quite a lot of imagination, but probably more like baseball than anything. It requires looking at failure as just part of the process. We drill dry holes, it doesn't work. We just got to make sure we have enough money for another try. Every time you do something, you're learning. Just don't run. I used to say, back when we had phone books, I would say the main goal of the oil business is to stay in the phone book. Just if you can stay in the game, you've always got a chance. And so that makes us very appropriate to invest in the philanthropy world, to invest in things that are being imagined, things that are maybe not really proven, things that are in a high scaling, high leverage position. And we find that most people want to, when they get into the philanthropy stage of their life, they tend to want to do something that seems safe to them, proven. They want to make sure their money's not, wasted. And we don't look at trying something that doesn't work as waste, at the front end of a process. We just look at it as, you're trying to fill a void, and it takes time to figure things like that out. So we tend to be very entrepreneurial with our philanthropy portfolio. And, sometimes we invest in businesses in our philanthropy portfolio, because that business is focused on meeting a need of some kind. Of what? Do you consider it more beneficial to your family if the trash company that comes by and picks up your trash is organized as a nonprofit rather than a for-profit? You just want your trash gone, right? So when there's a need, a human need that does good, we're okay if somebody is going to make a profit off of that and reinvest in their business.
Yeah, something that I always find to be really interesting is that people are like, "Oh, I'm doing all this great work in the nonprofit world, and I have my other business." And it's like, well, actually, no, the business is you're supporting. Could be dozens or hundreds or more people. Could be thousands of people. The ripple effect, and that's the ultimate level of charity is really getting someone a job and helping them get on their own 2 feet, as opposed to, oh, look, I gave a man, a sandwich today. So, meaning you have to do both, but.
Exactly. So we tend to stay away from things that have great emotional appeal, because those are much easier to raise money for, and get more into things that are more structural, like the root cause of the thing. You've got people taking care of the homeless, let's say, but we would be more attuned to look at the root causes and address that. That's the kind of thing we tend to look at. And we have one philanthropic. We have in our foundation, we have one investment that is in a foreign country. That's a developing country, and it's doing exactly that, providing thousands of jobs. Those jobs are it's in an area where human trafficking is especially child trafficking, because of the way that people look. The child trafficking is a major industry, and most of the reason why people get sucked into it is because of lack of opportunity. So by providing opportunity, it's really an export type of business. By providing that opportunity, you're actually fighting human trafficking in a root cause kind of a way, and that may not be as great of an emotional appeal for fun, for a fundraising, but it's a much more sustainable fix, and it's going to the root cause. So that would be an example of the kind of thing we do. Yeah, because God, I'm 100% sure. Now, it's not in the Bible, but I'm 100% sure There'll be no IRS agents at the judgment seat advising God on whether something counts as charity or not, whether you met your 501c3 designation requirements. I'm very confident. I don't think he does not make distinctions. He says, pay your taxes, and then what's left over, you do it all. Whatever you do as unto the Lord, for this is Colossians 3:23 and 24. Whatever you do heartily as unto the Lord, for it is from him you will receive the reward of the inheritance.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things. And you're absolutely right that people do give to those emotional things when something is tragic. I know one of the initiatives that they have here in my city is getting people life insurance, because what happens, a young guy passes away, and all of a sudden, what could have been, I don't know, $100 a month to give him, a reason, like at least something. All of a sudden, his wife and kids are left without anything, and the community now is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to help this person when it is a very preventable problem. But we a lot of times don't like to give to preventable problems because it's very difficult to see the fix that you have within that. So let's just talk about, with regard to the business itself. How did you bring God into your business on a day by day basis? Was it something that you prayed about decisions in the boardroom, or was that more of like an individual thing? Or in the boardroom, you really were trying to use your head as much as possible and hoped God, directed you?
No, I'll tell you what we did is, this idea of obey my commands. So if you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, God says basically life is connecting to my design and doing life according to the way I constructed it to be successful. And death is being separated from my design and doing life the way you think it should be done, with you at the center, which is going to not work out. Okay, it's going to work out in death. And you see, once humanity took the I will be at the center path, the earth filled with violence, Genesis 6:11. That's why the flood happened. So the earth filled with violence. Why? Because everyone's at the center. We all vote for ourselves as the center. And when everyone's the center, it creates competition, because there can only be one center. So the earth fills with violence. But God's design is to have a team of stewards who are all focused on a common purpose. That's God's design. It was his design for Israel. It's his design for the Christian church. It's his design for humanity. That's the design. All the messianic kingdom psalms are the prophecies. It's that design. It's us teaming for a common purpose. So that's what we focused on. We didn't pray before stuff and compartmentalize. We did our Christian thing. Now we'll do our business thing. What we tried to do is inculcate the stewardship principles into everything we did. And we did that by inventing a toolkit for servant leadership. So servant leadership, I would say, is the call God makes for his people. So if you look at Israel, God gave, I call it self-governance. God gave a self-governance treaty to Israel. In the ancient world, they had these, what the historians called suzerain vassal treaty structures, where a superior king would make a treaty with an inferior king, and it would say, if you'll serve me faithfully, I will bless you, and if you don't serve me faithfully, I'll curse you. And there were all these provisions, and you see those treaties in action in the various stories of kings. It usually will use a term like and the king rebelled against them, so the king came in and attacked him. Well, the rebel is he stopped paying tribute, and he said, I don't think I have to do this anymore. That's one of these treaty things. Well, if you read Deuteronomy, it's structured as that treaty, except instead of being God to Moses, it's God to the people. So like Exodus 19:8, I think it is, the people say, we will do all you say. That's the signing of that treaty. And so then the structure of that is basically, if you look at the 10 Commandments, the first 5 basically say God gets to make the rules. So that's rule of law. The 5th commandment is like, if you're not old enough to understand the first 4, then just obey your parents. And then the second 5 commandments are summed up with Leviticus 19:18. Love your neighbor as yourself. So don't envy, don't take their stuff, don't hurt their person. And so really, if you take the fact that God gave people the choice and clear consequences, which is consent of the governed, your 3 pillars of self-governance are rule of law, consent of the governed, and I usually say private property, but really it's love your neighbor. But private property, if you can't honor somebody else's stuff, you certainly are not loving your neighbor. It's the least you can do in the love your neighbor category, right? So that's what he set up. And he said, and like in Deuteronomy 30, if you will do these things, you'll have life. I'm setting before you today these 2 roads. Life is this connection with one another through serving and mutual cooperation. And, that's like a market economy, right? What is a market economy? We compete to see who serves each other the best, and the one who serves best wins. That's a self-governing, that's an outgrowth of a self-governing structure. And
that's why we hate cheaters so much, because they're
gaming the system.
Right.
Yes. And then when the government starts intervening and picking the winners and losers, now we're shifting back over to the me at the center, because now whoever can get access can coerce and control. And now the earth's filling with violence again, right? Because the only reason you do what the government says is because they got the guns, and they should use that to protect the people, not to pick winners and losers. Okay, and so we tried to take those self-governing principles, and any leadership book is good. You take those leadership books, and the principles are all great, but then how do you turn those principles into daily activity? So we created a toolbox of mental images, mental models, and vocabulary that we put our people through, and we found that having a small number of things that we repeated incessantly is how we created a culture. So we worked very hard to create a culture, a love your neighbor culture, a servant leader culture, where we were serving our company's purpose, which is to, and we didn't sell our whole company. We sold most of our asset value, and most of the employees went with that. So we still have a kernel going, and we're starting to rebuild. But our basic approach is, how do we get everybody where they are doing what they do best? They understand the data, they have the facts, they know what we're trying to accomplish, and they're using their giftedness to make decisions and create value. And they know when to ask for help. And what we found was that, and we basically we hired inexperienced people and trained them all so that we could install this culture more readily. And what we found was, we estimate an efficiency factor of about 400%, maybe higher, because we're not having to have meetings to funnel information up for the decisions makers to make the meetings.
Yeah, it's unbelievable as you pick that up, but it's how much inefficiency there is, because it's really about giving a report card and to were you there on time? Let me make sure to check it off, and versus that idea of self-governance, which is so so critical.
Well, yeah, the tendency is to make rules, because rules are, I'm not sure what, oh, here we go. There it is. So let me share this. The tendency is to make rules because rules give control to the person enforcing the rules. And this is the two types of culture we have here. What we found is that blame, like you didn't keep my rules. Blame is the kind of the core way you create a self-serving culture. You obfuscate facts. You make the results that you're after as fuzzy as possible, or everybody, or you pretend you're getting a result when everybody knows it's not true. You socialize all the risks, and everything's oriented around the people and the processes, the positional power and the processes. The people with positional power must feel good about themselves, and the processes are all developed in order to protect them from information that will tell them things aren't, doesn't protect the illusion. And then everyone is blaming and positioning themselves to serve the position, and that's how you go up. And this is very common in human endeavors, this blame culture. In the blame culture, the goal is to get to the top so that you can be served. In the create together culture, the goal, you still have an authority pyramid, but the people that are in authority serve up. So they put themselves at the bottom and serve up, and they create what we call freedom V's. Let's see if I can find the freedom V here. So they create the freedom V's, which are the consequences, the boundaries within which people can act. So my job as a business leader is to make clear roles, clear objectives, and clear ranges of authority for each employee, so that they know where they're at and what they're expected to do. So when someone's learning a job, they need to be down in the bottom of the freedom V with very limited discretion because they don't know their job. But the goal is to teach them the job so they can grow in discretion, and we give them very broad latitude at that point. We just want them to get the job done because they now know what to do. So when you're serving up like that, you don't have many meetings. We had just a couple of meetings a week, maybe, even if that. Formal meetings, lots of informal meetings. The informal meetings happen all the time as needed, but they're quick and then they get over, and then the person gets the information they need and they make a decision. So, I asked our champion of this that helped put this together, Dave Coonert. One time I asked him, how many decisions does a lease manager, the guy that gets in the pickup truck and drives out to the lease to see how things are going and makes adjustments, how many decisions does that blue collar worker make a day that affects our value? And he said 200. And I said, well, most days I make 0. Okay, because I'm building structures like this where the decisions are made by the people who know what's going on. They're there on site, and they know exactly what's happening on the drilling rig, and they make adjustments right then. And then I make decisions when the structures aren't producing the results, and then change the structures. So what does that result in? Well, that results in life, because the people that and I can put this one up too. This is another.
So is this something that's?
I have this idea. If you can't put it on a 5x7 card, you don't really understand it. This is what I was talking about. Structure demands behavior. So I'm building structures to produce specific results. And and if the results aren't happening, then I have this other thing. I got this from D. Hicks, so it's another leadership guy. I have this mental model, SLY, SLY. If there's a miss, here's how I as a leader can take responsibility without trying to make choices for other people, which is an illusion. You can't make choices for other people. 85% of the time, the problem is there's a structure problem, an improper incentive, an improper role definition, an improper freedom V. Someone's placed in a role where they don't have the giftedness. We have somebody too high in the freedom V. 10% of the time it's leadership. I didn't communicate clearly enough. And 5% of the time it's you, it's the person. And I either need to reassign you within the organization or without. Okay, so in every one of those cases, I can take responsibility to do something without trying to take decision-making of power away from other people.
Wow. So let me ask you. So this works great in a business where you got 200 people. Is this possible to do in a country with 350 million people? Like, is this possible to do on a government level, or not really?
Completely. I would say that when God set up Israel, this is what they did some of the time, and then they would start being at the center, and they would start getting violent and exploiting one another, and then God would give them over to a foreign power to exploit them, so as judgment, and then they would cry out to God, and he would give them a judge, and they'd be delivered, and then they repeated. So they went through these cycles of being self-governing and then falling into tyranny, and then self-governing, falling into tyranny. So that was the model. And then they asked for a king, and God said, he's going to become a tyrant. You're going to ask me for, it's 1 Samuel 8, you're going to ask me for deliverance, and I'm going to say, I gave you what you asked for. So that's centralized authority. So government is very much a part of this. I would say that the United States is the first large-scale application of this principle. And when we have abided by it, we've gotten life. And when we've strayed from it, we've gotten death. So when we abided by it, when George Washington turned his sword over to the Continental Congress, who was pretty dysfunctional at the time, and there were a big part of America wanted him to be king, and he said, I want us to be self-governing. That was a defining moment in American history. And then we had a republic. So the republic has had fits and starts. And when we've treated all men are created equal, when we've lived up to that, it's been amazing. But slavery based on race didn't live up to that, and that's created a lot of human misery. So we've applied it sufficiently to have massive outbreaks in innovation. The agricultural revolution with John Deere's lightweight steel plow, that wouldn't have happened in Europe because they had serfdom. And in serfdom, you can't allow innovation or it threatens the status quo. But in America, a guy, there's tons of land, and somebody can get that plow and go from farming 40 acres to farming 160 acres with the same amount of work. And you have this explosion of productivity, and that's created a cycle of technical innovation that actually came back and forced Europe to break its structures down and start mimicking what was going on in the U.S. to varying degrees. So you've even experienced that in Israel. You kind of started off with a pretty socialist view, and it shifted to a market-based view, I think largely out of practicality, but you're also returning to your biblical roots, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also goes, what we were talking about, the kind of being a good steward, right? That's the whole idea of the Shemitah, of the sabbatical, when you return, the Jubilee, when you return the land, it's not me owning it, it's me stewarding it, me serving the land, me doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then when this is finished, you don't own it anyway. It goes back to its original ownership. And so I do think that that's kind of like, somewhat built in. But that's, it's amazing that, I guess America has done it. And there's kind of this, I guess, this push and pull as to, will America be able to keep that balance and keep that V standing? Because it's a difficult balance to stay on a point, right? That's the.
We've gone through cycles too. We keep going through cycles. During the FDR era, the government put in price controls and massive regulatory control. I mean, we basically became a socialist country. And then World War II came, and they had to let the businesses deregulate in order to make the kind of production they needed to win the war. And then that perpetuated after the war. And now, and then it started happening again. And then Reagan came in, and then it started happening again. Yeah, so we go through the cycles as well. And we still have a pretty good segment of the population that, is socialist in its mentality. But, about a third of the country was for the British during the Revolutionary War. So we've always been divided. But to the extent we've had a very imperfect application of self-governance, but it's been enough to create massive blessings, which just shows you the extent of God's faithfulness to his promises. If you'll even do part way, you get this massive outsized benefit from it.
Yeah, no, and we are seeing now certainly a return. I think the Bible has been selling like hotcakes. I know our Israel Bible, we've sold many, many more over the last, I'd say, 3-4 years, and really continuing to rise, because I think there is kind of this return. Wait a second, we're misaligned, and now there is kind of this shift back, particularly amongst young men, back to God, back to the church, and reconnecting with their religion. So I do think we kind of have that reckoning. We're in the last just couple of minutes. One thing I wanted to just kind of shift the conversation and ask you. There's a lot of discussion within the MAGA movement, and with regard to America first versus America only, and what role Israel plays within that. I'm an America first guy as an American, meaning I think that America has many, many problems. Some of the policing that needs to be done around the world is in America's interest, and I think that's very important. It does keep pricing down, but at the same token, I don't think that American troops should be getting involved in every single conflict. But then there are definitely exceptions to every rule, right? And so I'm curious, some of your thoughts as to where you see Israel within that picture of America's foreign policy.
Well, I mean, I see the dumbest thing you can do is spend $1 gazillion and fight wars when somebody else will do it for you. I mean, what's the most practical thing in the world is to have an ally like Israel, be the tip of the spear to keep a nuclear Iran from destabilizing the globe and attacking America. Iran declared war on America 40 years ago and said, we're going to create terror cells and a nuclear bomb and kill you, and has demonstrated that they absolutely intend to do that. And we have an ally who is closer to proximity and is been told, you go first. And so all we have to do is support that ally to defeat that enemy at a fraction of the cost that it would be to ourselves. So what's not America first about that?
Yeah. I definitely hear that, right? A lot of people are like, aid that's given to Israel, and look at this, but America is spending a lot a lot more money on.
We're saving massive amounts of money relative to what it would be.
I guess this is the self-governance that you talk about, where it's like, okay, you take care of it, or I should say we take care of it, and so it doesn't have to be America's problems. They can kind of put in the freedom fee. They just need to give us the amount of leeway to do certain things. So
that's fair, because if Israel, and Israel's never even hinted at this, but if Israel just said, yeah, we're going to invade all these countries and oppress them all, okay, that would be crossing the line of the freedom fee, right? So then that would create a different kind of a problem. But Israel has said, we want our sovereign borders, and we want to be left alone to thrive. And we want trading partners. Okay, well, that's all very self-governing, that all is stabilizing to the world. It's helping America. And not to mention that Israel's a great trading partner for us and a great technology partner. I think we should redefine our relationship with Israel, make it much more formal. I know from talking to my friends in Israel that the sentiment there among the thought leaders is, hey, we'd love to not have to take any aid, but we take the aid because you make us, because you won't let us develop our own weapons. And we can develop the weapons way cheaper and way better than your prime contractors are, because we're a smaller, more nimble organization. So let us go, and we'll sell you back stuff, and we'll make way more money than you give us in aid, and it'll be a win-win. And I love the sound of that. I mean, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where people it looks bad, and then if you say take away the aid, then all of a sudden, the ADL is like, oh, he's an anti-Semite because he doesn't want to give aid to Israel. And I'm definitely more on that side of like, okay, well, yes, when we started with the $3 billion, it was like, I don't know, 30% of our GDP. And it was like, maybe it was very necessary. At this point, I think it's 1%, maybe. It's a significantly smaller amount.
I think Israel, at first, Israel was a sponsored nation.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the design. But, when you have children, you sponsor them. But then you want them to grow up and leave home, and Israel, I think, is ready to be a partner. In fact, Mashi Kapel, I think, just had a podcast recently, I heard, and he said, we're ready to be a partner now. We've gotten to the point where we obviously, are a much smaller market than the United States, but we punch above our weight, and we're ready to be like a junior partner. Let's redefine this whole relationship, and I think it's time for that. So America First, I think, means it's kind of like it's the biblical thing is let's take like Ephesians 5. A man who loves his wife loves himself. Okay, so it's Ecclesiastes again. Cast your bread on the water; it'll come back to you after many days. The best way to serve yourself is to serve others. That's actually what's in your best interest. There's just a time lag. And so if America is going to put itself first, the thing it should do is serve others. And you serve others by doing what's in their best interest, not in gaining control of them. And so in Israel, it was in their best interest to protect them while they were growing up. Now I think it's time to redefine, and it's in Israel's best interest to now create them create a partnership relationship with them, and I think that then is also in America's best interest.
Oh, it's amazing how it all comes together. It's like individual, business, country, and globe. Right, all comes within a single system. So, Tim, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. I know your time is valuable and precious, and really appreciate you sitting with me today. And I think this was just a fantastic interview. So, really appreciate you taking the time today.
It's great to visit with you, Rami, and just really, really, really happy that it looks like, at least for a time, that you may have a period of peace. But I'll just say, if you become complacent, things will be worse than they were before.
Yeah, absolutely right. If you sit back and you get fat, right? As it in Deuteronomy, I forget the verse, right? But become prosperous, but yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do.
Look at all I've done. Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah. Now's the time for humility and for diligence to set up an ongoing effort to ensure the proxies don't return. I think that's really key. So I think anything you can do to make that a cultural part of, everlasting vigilance, a part of the Israeli culture, not, okay, we won and we don't have to do that again. That would be like saying, oh, I got my kid through 5th grade. Glad we don't have to educate them anymore.
Right. Yes, we know too many of those types of stories. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Okay, thanks. See you, Rami.